You don't fall because your enemies are too strong. You fall because you trusted someone who smiled while hollow inside. Not all threats arrive with claws and knives. Some wear politeness like perfume. They nod at the right moments, say the right things, and hide fear behind every gesture of friendliness. But make no mistake, underneath it's still fear. Fear of conflict. Fear of being disliked. Fear of standing alone. And that fear eventually betrays. Power isn't destroyed by strength. It gets betrayed by weakness. Because when the moment demands courage, the weak don't rise, they disappear. And you're left to carry the cost. Machiavelli never guessed who would fall. He studied people. Not what they said, but what they did when silence filled the room. When applause went missing. When no one was watching. That's where truth hides. Not in speeches, not in smiles, but in quiet reactions when validation is gone. Among the many faces of weakness, there are 3 that are deadly. 3 patterns that don't shout. They slip through the cracks. And if you see even one, just one, you can be sure of this betrayal isn't far. The first one is subtle, almost innocent. A man who over-explains, over-justifies, over-talks. He defends his every move, his every opinion. He needs you to understand him, to agree with him, to see that he's right. But what you're really seeing is a man not trying to convince you, but trying to convince himself. When someone feels the need to keep repeating why they did something, to rephrase, to clarify, to make sure you don't misunderstand them, they're not confident. They're scared. They don't feel solid in their own decisions, so they search for your approval like a lifeline. Machiavelli watched this happen in court every day. A true prince barely spoke. He issued commands, not explanations. But the ones surrounding him, the ministers, the flatterers, the merchants, talked endlessly. Because their power wasn't real. It depended on being liked, agreed with, approved, and that's the most fragile kind of power there is. A man who needs permission to act will never lead. Because leadership requires risk. It demands the courage to move without needing applause. To make a decision and not explain it to anyone. That's what strength sounds like. Stillness, not noise. So the next time you hear someone explain themselves again and again, someone trying to sound reasonable, kind, morally right, you're not hearing strength. You're hearing collapse. Slow, quiet, inevitable collapse. Because real strength doesn't explain, it acts. There's a kind of weakness that's harder to detect, because it doesn't look like fear. It doesn't shake or stutter or back down. It smiles, it helps, it agrees, it flatters. But underneath that surface is something just as fragile: submission dressed as virtue. This is not kindness. This is not generosity. It's weaponized niceness. The kind that avoids conflict not out of wisdom, but out of fear. The kind that says yes, not because it means it, but because it's scared of what happens if it says no. You've seen this before. The man who never disagrees, the one who praises everyone, the one who's always helpful, always smiling, always available. But when pressure builds, when the tension rises, that niceness begins to crack. You start to see the irritation, the sarcasm, the quiet resentment beneath the surface. Because here's the truth. His niceness was never real. It was a tactic, a way to avoid rejection, a disguise to be liked, accepted, safe. And when that tactic stops working, when people don't respond the way he hoped, he flips. He becomes bitter, defensive, cold, because his entire identity was built on pleasing others. Machiavelli knew this all too well. He wrote, "A prince must know how to do wrong and not use it unless compelled." In other words, true strength knows how to face conflict, how to choose confrontation when necessary, how to draw a line. But weakness in this form hides from it. It pretends to be good because it's too afraid to be real. So when you see someone who never disagrees, who always tries to keep the peace, who apologizes for things that don't need apologies, understand this. You're looking at a man who's terrified of disapproval. And when the moment comes where loyalty is tested, he won't choose you. He'll choose comfort. He'll choose safety. He'll choose whatever or whoever makes him feel liked again. Power doesn't trust the agreeable man. It doesn't rely on the one who flatters. Because power knows the man who tries to keep everyone happy will eventually betray anyone who disappoints him. And that's the danger. These men don't stab you from the front. They disappear when it gets hard. They retreat into silence, into passivity, into self-preservation. And that retreat feels like betrayal. Because it is. Machiavelli didn't fear loud enemies. He feared quiet allies. The ones who nod but never speak truth. The ones who smile but never stand when it counts. Because that kind of weakness is invisible until it costs you everything. There's a third signal. And this one, it's louder, flashier, harder to miss. But people still get fooled by it because it wears the mask of confidence. It's called display addiction. You know the type. The man who can't go 5 minutes without needing recognition. The one who posts constantly, brags loudly, exaggerates every minor win, turns every small action into a public performance. He's always on, always performing. He wants the spotlight, not occasionally, but constantly. But Machiavelli saw right through it. Because real confidence doesn't beg to be seen. It doesn't chase applause. It moves in silence, waits in shadows, and strikes only when necessary. Display addiction, on the other hand, is panic in disguise. It's the desperate attempt to prove worth through visibility. The man addicted to being seen doesn't know who he is when no one is watching. If he's not being talked about, praised, envied, he feels like he's disappearing. And that fear eats at him. This kind of man doesn't build foundations. He builds theater. He doesn't invest in depth. He invests in attention. And attention, as Machiavelli knew, is the most fleeting form of power. The moment it fades, these men fall apart. Worse still, their need to be seen makes them unpredictable. They'll betray allies, leak secrets, even start unnecessary conflict, all to get a moment of validation. And if you're close to them when that happens, you'll pay the price. Machiavelli learned to use them, not trust them. He let them play their part on the stage. He let them believe they were powerful. But behind the scenes, he was the one directing. Because a man who needs to be noticed can always be led if you understand his hunger. And that's what Machiavelli mastered, not just identifying weakness, but turning it into control. He didn't shame the over-justifier. He listened to him, gave him nods of approval, let him talk. And soon, that man felt heard, attached, loyal. Not because Machiavelli respected him, but because he understood how badly he needed validation. He didn't confront the people-pleaser. He gave him a job, made him feel chosen, let him feel safe. And that man would never risk betrayal, not because of principle, but because betrayal would mean losing the only place he felt accepted. And the display addict Machiavelli gave him the stage. Let him take credit. Let him wear the crown in public. But in private, Machiavelli held the reins. Because when you give a weak man the illusion of power, he'll never question who actually has it. That's the secret most never see. Control doesn't always look like domination. Sometimes it looks like listening, like giving space, like letting someone talk themselves into loyalty. Because the weak man doesn't want freedom. He wants comfort. He wants approval. He wants identity. And once you know that, you can shape him without lifting a finger. But Machiavelli's greatest power wasn't in how he saw others. It was in how ruthlessly he saw himself. He didn't just point fingers. He turned the same cold, precise judgment inward. Because he knew if you want to lead, you can't afford to be the weakest man in your own court. The moment you miss your own patterns, the world will use them against you. So he began a daily war. Not against enemies, against his own instincts. He paid attention to when he talked too much, when he started over-explaining his choices, when he felt the urge to justify a decision to people who didn't matter. And when he caught himself, he didn't just brush it off, he stopped. Right there. He asked, am I speaking from conviction? Or am I asking for permission to exist? And if the answer wasn't conviction, he cut it. Because he knew the man who explains too much is negotiating with his own authority. Then he started observing how easily he said yes. To a weak man, yes feels safe. It keeps people happy. It avoids conflict. But it slowly poisons your ability to lead. Machiavelli began asking himself, would I still say yes if I didn't fear losing this person's approval? If the answer was no, then the answer had to be no, without excuse, without apology. Because every yes born from fear is a door left open for betrayal. And then he trained himself in silence. He noticed how the weak hate silence, how they fill it with jokes, with praise, with over-explanations, because silence makes them feel exposed, naked. But he embraced it. He practiced silence in rooms full of noise. Let people squirm. Let them reveal themselves. He knew something most never learn. If you can sit calmly in a room where no one agrees with you, no one praises you, no one even acknowledges you, you have power. Real power. Because your worth is no longer attached to attention. It's forged in solitude. And finally, he practiced invisibility. Most men want to be seen. They crave visibility, credit, applause. But Machiavelli learned to move in the shadows. He let others chase the spotlight. He watched them run in circles while he waited quiet, steady, patient. And when he moved, people didn't see it as progress. They saw it as a rival. Because he hadn't been hyping himself up. He'd been building in silence. So when he finally spoke, it felt like something sacred. When he acted, it felt inevitable. This wasn't luck. It wasn't charisma. It was engineered. Built choice by choice, discipline by discipline, until no trace of weak behavior remained. Not because he wanted to seem strong, but because he refused to leave any weakness exposed that others could later use to break him. Because that's how power falls. Not by attack, by the cracks you ignored inside yourself. The true art Machiavelli understood wasn't in crushing enemies. It was in seeing the fall before it happened, predicting collapse before it arrived. And the collapse almost never came from obvious enemies. It came from trusted hands. It came from weakness mistaken as loyalty. That's why he feared weak men more than wicked ones. Because at least the wicked have a purpose. They want something. You can prepare for that. But the weak, they want everything and they'll trade anything to get it. You don't fall because your enemies are too strong. You fall because you trusted someone who smiled while hollow. Not all threats come with fangs and knives. Some wear politeness like perfume and leak fear behind every nod. Power isn't broken by strength. It's betrayed by weakness. Because when it matters most, the weak don't rise, they disappear. And they leave you holding the weight. Machiavelli didn't guess who would fail. He studied them. He watched not for what they said, but for what they did when silence fell, when the room turned cold, when applause went missing. That's where the truth lives. And he trained himself to do the same, to be unreadable, to be calm while others cracked, to stay standing when others collapsed under pressure. That's where real respect is born. Not from shouting, from silence. Because people don't fear the man who speaks the most. They fear the one who doesn't flinch, who doesn't explain, who doesn't need their approval. That's how you control the room without raising your voice. That's how you lead without asking. But this only works if you first cut away every behavior inside you that exposes fear. Every habit that leaks insecurity. Every movement that begs to be liked. You have to notice when you smile too much, compliment too easily, agree without alignment. You have to notice the moments when your mouth moves, not from clarity, but from discomfort. Because the world sees what you don't clean up, and what it sees it will use. That's what Machiavelli meant when he said power requires silence. Not the silence of fear, the silence of someone who has nothing left to prove. He knew the moment you start performing for people who don't matter, you lose leverage over those who do. And once they see your cracks, they won't respect your words. They'll just wait for your collapse. So he burned the cracks out of himself, one by one, and in doing so he became something rare. What made Machiavelli different wasn't intelligence. It wasn't cunning. It was that he saw what others refused to, and he acted on it without mercy. While most men tried to look powerful, Machiavelli asked himself the questions that exposed the truth. Do I crave being liked more than I value truth? Do I explain when I should have stayed silent? Do I speak to lead or just to be heard? Do I say yes out of fear of rejection? He knew these weren't just questions. They were mirrors. And if he didn't answer them with action, they'd rot his foundation. So he made his posture sharper, his silence heavier, his presence unshakable. He understood when you remove all fear-based behavior, when you burn out every excuse to be soft, you become something alien to the average man. And that's what terrifies them. That's what earns respect, because people don't respect what they understand. They respect what they can't predict, the unknown, the unreadable. So Machiavelli didn't try to be impressive. He tried to be undeniable. He didn't force admiration. He let them sit in rooms where his silence felt louder than their words, where his stillness felt like control, where his absence made them second-guess everything they said. That's the core of power, not being the loudest, but being the one they can't ignore, even when you say nothing. And once you become that, everything changes. People speak more carefully around you. They start measuring their tone. They start wondering what you think of them even if you haven't said a word. Why? Because they don't want to look weak in your eyes. Because you've shown them what strength looks like, and it's everything they fear they're not. You've stripped away your need for attention. You've silenced the part of you that used to beg for validation. You've made peace with solitude, and that makes your approval incredibly rare. And rare things are valuable. So you don't give your respect away easily. You don't flatter casually. You don't apologize for making people uncomfortable. Because your standard is higher, and they'll either rise to it, or they'll fade from your orbit entirely. And either way you win, because you either attract the strong or you expose the weak. But you never compromise. You never reach down. You only pull upward or walk alone. This is the final shift. The point where imitation ends and embodiment begins. Because the true Machiavellian doesn't wear strength like a jacket, something you put on when needed. He becomes strength, breathes it, walks with it, sleeps beside it. Until one day the man who once explained too much, smiled too wide, or begged to be seen no longer exists. He's been replaced by something sharper, more dangerous, a presence you don't question, a force you don't test. Not because he shouts, not because he threatens, but because every inch of his being is built on restraint, observation, and power that doesn't need to announce itself. That's what Machiavelli mastered: presence so potent that others bend before a word is spoken. And you, if you've made it this far, have already begun the same path. Because you now see what others don't. You no longer confuse friendliness with loyalty. You no longer assume volume equals strength. You no longer mistake smiles for sincerity. You've learned to study the cracks, to notice the patterns, to feel the silence. You've realized weakness isn't always loud. It's polite, it's agreeable, it's obsessed with being seen. But most importantly, it betrays you, not in battle, but in silence when you needed support the most. That's why you watch, not with suspicion but with precision. You listen not for the loudest voice but for the first excuse. You trust not the kindest face but the rarest consistency. And most of all, you act, quietly, decisively, without apology. Because real power isn't in how you move them. It's in how you've mastered yourself. Your presence now speaks before you do. Your silence now carries weight. And your name, your reputation, your attention, they are no longer given. They're earned. This is how you outlast. Not by playing louder, but by playing longer. Not by being loved by many, but by being needed by a few. And as others burn themselves out for applause, validation, attention, you build in silence. Forge in fire. Move like smoke. You become a man that cannot be shaped by the room because you've already shaped yourself. And once you've done that, once you've killed the fear, the neediness, the hollow desperation, you don't just avoid betrayal. You become immune to it, because no one can betray a man who doesn't hand over his trust lightly. No one can collapse a mind built on solitude. No one can shame someone who no longer performs for applause. This is where power lives, in your ability to disappear and still be felt. In your ability to say nothing and still be feared. In your ability to give less and mean more. You are not who you were at the start of this journey. You've seen too much, felt too much, stripped away too much. And now, you're something else. Something rare. Something that no weak man can imitate, no crowd can ignore, and no enemy can predict. A presence built in silence, a weapon forged in restraint. A man who doesn't chase power, but radiates it. And that's why you're dangerous now. Because strength is no longer what you do. It's who you are. And the world, whether it applauds or not, will notice. If you found this voice speaking something you've always felt but never heard out loud, comment below. Share the moment you saw yourself reflected. Tell us what weakness you've killed, or which one you're still hunting. And if you want more content like this, raw, sharp, unsparing, don't just watch. Like, subscribe. It tells the system this message matters. And your support helps us craft the next one even sharper. Until then, stay quiet, stay lethal, stay untouchable. Because the moment you act like you don't need to be noticed, they'll never stop watching.